Hi guys, welcome to a new video series on parasitology. The way we're going to approach this series is we're going to cover a few basic concepts and an overview of the host-parasite relationship. Then we're going to begin taking each parasite group and dissecting its members and the details we need to know on each member. By the end of this video series, you should have a basic overview of the major parasites, from what diseases they cause to how we can diagnose, treat, and prevent the diseases they cause. This video is an introductory video where we'll build the foundation required for this entire series. So, before we begin this series, we need to understand what parasitology is. Parasitology is the study of parasites. Okay, what's a parasite? A parasite is a living organism that needs to spend at least part of its life cycle inside or on another living organism. From this, we can begin to draw up some concepts. In order to survive, parasites rely on other organisms which we refer to as the host. Hosts can be animals, plants, other microorganisms, or even cells that provide nourishment and shelter to the parasite, provided that the host is the larger organism of the two. When we start to enter medical discussions, we use humans as the primary example for the host, but for now, I want to keep it general. Okay, parasites occupy hosts for a certain time or indefinitely to benefit from them. Why do they need a host, and how do they benefit from having a host? Many parasites have limited mechanisms to sustain them and keep them alive, so they need a source, aka the host, to provide them with a stable environment and continuous access to resources necessary for their survival, such as nutrients and energy. Therefore, parasites cannot survive independent of a host. If the host dies, the parasite may lose these resources and consequently die as well. That's why most parasites don't kill their host, but instead coexist with the host in a way that allows the host to survive long enough to support them. So with that, we can establish that there always needs to be a symbiosis or a relationship between the parasite and the host. This is what we call the host-parasite relationship. This relationship will always benefit the parasite and will always harm the host. But again, not to the point of death, since the parasite needs the host to survive for it to also survive. I want to stop here for a second and make sure that we understand that while there are other symbiotic relationships like commensalism, where the host is unaffected, or mutualism, where the host actually benefits from the relationship, this does not apply when we're talking about parasites. It might apply to other organisms that coexist together. If you have absolutely no idea what I'm talking about, then ignore what I just said. But if you are aware of these other relationships, then take care not to confuse this one with them. The specific relationship that the host and the parasite have is called parasitism, where the host is negatively affected and hence the weaker party in this relationship, if you will, since again, the parasite consumes the host's nutrients, can damage the host's tissues, or initiates an immune response to accommodate for its stay. This is exactly what we just said, but I want to focus on the section highlighted in blue. The parasite needs to fulfill certain criteria for it to be considered a parasite. We can't just call anything a parasite. A parasite always needs to be smaller than the host. It needs to use the host's mechanisms for its own survival. It doesn't normally kill its host, as it would be disadvantageous for it as well. And finally, it may or may not cause disease in the host, which brings us to another important concept. For there to be a host-parasite relationship, the parasite needs to infect or inhabit the host, but it only sometimes causes disease in the host. So there are two options. Either the host is simply infected, or it develops a disease. And this depends on the host's immunity. For simplicity's sake, we're going to assume that the host is a human being X. Infection occurs when a parasite enters and begins to live, develop, or multiply within human X. If human X has strong immunity and hence increased resistance, the parasite will not cause disease and he will remain healthy. In this case, the parasite is either eventually driven away or assumes a benign relationship with human being X. There are two types of infections, asymptomatic and symptomatic. Human X is simply infected with the parasite if he doesn't present with any noticeable symptoms or illness. If he presents with symptoms, that means he has developed a disease. In a diseased human, the parasite impairs normal body functions, whether that may mean damaging body tissues or eliciting a strong immune response. So, to summarize, we can say that all diseased hosts are infected, but not all infected hosts are diseased. I will repeat again. All diseased hosts are infected, but not all infected hosts are disease. Okay, starting from here, I'm going to need your full attention. We're going to talk about parasites first and then move on to the host, which from now on we'll take as a human being to visualize the concepts better. So delving deeper into parasites, there are two main ways we can classify them. The first one is according to the site of infection, meaning whether the parasite lives within the human's body or outside the human's body, meaning on their skin or hair. The Greek prefix endo means inside, from which we can establish that endoparasites live within the body. That's why they are also called internal parasites. When we describe the host-parasite relationship here, we say that the parasite has infected the human. Examples of endoparasites include protozoa and helminths, which we will talk extensively about in subsequent videos. Ectoparasites, parasites which live on the body's surface and therefore the opposite of endoparasites, are also called external parasites, and they infest the human. Examples of ectoparasites are arthropods. This covers what we just said, but I've made it easier to visualize the host-parasite relationship in both cases. I also just want to bring back the slide again and clarify something now that we know what an endoparasite and an ectoparasite is. We said that endoparasites infect humans, so this slide covers how an infection can develop into a disease if symptoms are present in human being X. We can also classify parasites according to the host-parasite interactions. I'm only going to cover the most clinically relevant types of parasites under this classification. We have obligate parasites, which cannot live independently of the host. That means that they cannot complete their life cycle or reproduce without exploiting a suitable human body. Therefore, the parasite being dependent on the host for survival and reproduction is the defining characteristic of obligate parasites. Something else to note is that they don't necessarily have to spend their entire life on or in the human body, just certain life stages, and this distinction will be important in a bit. Facultative parasites can either live independent of the human body or live in association with it depending on their needs. From their name, permanent parasites remain on or in the host for their entire life cycle, and once established, live continuously with the host without leaving it. In this way, we can also expect permanent parasites to cause chronic infections in humans. This might bring the question, okay, so what's the difference between obligate parasites and permanent parasites if they both live independent of the host? Remember that we said that once obligate parasites are established in or on the human, they completely depend on them, but they don't necessarily have to spend their entire life associated with the human body. It's just that whatever they do, they depend entirely on the human. On the other hand, permanent parasites spend the entire duration of their life associated with the human. For permanent parasites, the host is their permanent residence. In this way, both obligate and permanent parasites depend on their host, but permanent parasites never leave the host at any point in their life cycle. With dependence being their shared similarity, we can establish that permanent parasites are a subset of obligate parasites. We can also establish that all permanent parasites are obligate parasites, but not all obligate parasites are permanent parasites. Pause the video here and listen to that sentence again. Temporary parasites visit the human briefly to obtain nutrition and then leave when they're done. The most common examples of temporary parasites are mosquitoes and bedbugs that feed on human blood for a short time before leaving. Accidental parasites establish themselves in a host that is not their usual host. For example, parasites normally infecting animals but occasionally found in humans like Toxocara canis are accidental parasites. Opportunistic parasites normally don't cause disease in healthy humans, but can cause infections when the human's immune system is weakened or compromised due to conditions like HIV or AIDS, cancer treatment, organ transplants, or other immunosuppressive states. Finally, zoonotic parasites naturally infect animals but can be transmitted to humans. The difference between accidental parasites and zoonotic parasites is that for an accidental parasite, the atypical host is undesired and often a dead end for them. In many cases, they can't complete their development or reproduce in the host, whereas zoonotic parasites are important to study as they cause diseases that can affect public health. This is a summary slide of the two classification systems that we just covered. Okay, we're done talking about parasites. I want you to pause the video here and take a deep breath. Now that we're back, we're going to begin talking about the host. Thankfully for both of us, there's only one way we're going to classify hosts, but it's going to sound a little weird. Look, when we were classifying parasites, we did it according to the characteristics of the parasite, according to the parasite itself. This time, we're going to classify the hosts not according to their own characteristics, but based on the role each host plays in the life cycle of the parasite. In other words, the classification is based on the biological and reproductive stages of the parasite within the host rather than any host criteria. Definitive hosts carry the sexually mature parasite. They are the final hosts where the adult parasite lives and reproduces. Intermediate hosts carry the immature or asexual stage of the parasite. The parasite undergoes development or multiplication inside the intermediate host but doesn't reach sexual maturity there. To understand this more easily, I want you to think of the host as a home and the parasite as a tiny animal. The intermediate host is like a temporary home where the parasite stays when it's still a kid or growing up, but can't have babies yet. The definitive host is the home where the parasite grows up and becomes a grown-up that can have baby parasites. So the parasite moves from the intermediate kid home to the definitive grown-up home to finish growing and making baby parasites. The parasite develops in both hosts, but it can only reproduce in the definitive host. Reservoir hosts carry the parasite long-term. The host often doesn't get sick, but by harboring the parasite, it acts as a potential source of infection for other hosts. Parasitic hosts carry the parasite, which remains alive but does not grow or change in the host. Finally, a vector carries and transmits the parasite from one host to another host. The last thing that we're going to cover in this video is the parasitic life cycle, and this is probably the most important part of this video as we'll rely heavily on these concepts in the next videos. A parasite's life cycle consists of a series of stages in which the parasite lives, grows, and reproduces by moving between hosts or environment. Its life cycle can be simple if it involves only one host, which we'll take as a human being, or complex if it involves two hosts. It will spend some of its phases inside the human body, where we as healthcare professionals can begin to acquire knowledge on symptoms, diagnosis, and medications suitable for treating the patient. And some phases outside the body, where we can study the epidemiology, prevention, and control of diseases caused by the parasites. This is a basic framework of how most parasitic life cycles happen. First, the parasite enters and infects human being X. This stage is called the infective stage. The parasite then grows, multiplies, and causes disease in human being X. This is called the pathogenic stage. The parasite produces either offspring or other stages, after which they leave human being X and survive outside the body until another human is affected to continue the cycle. There are many ways the parasite can leave the human body, for example, via stool, urine, and sputum. We can use the samples excreted from humans to detect which parasite they're infected with. This stage is called the diagnostic stage. Very briefly, there are several lab methods we can use to diagnose the patient, but keep in mind that not every method can be used to detect every parasite. We can take samples from stool, urine, blood, cerebrospinal fluid, aspirates, or tissue biopsies. There's also imaging techniques, endoscopy, ELISA, and PCR. That's it for the introduction to parasitology. Let's just quickly recap everything that we covered in this video. The parasite needs to spend some part of its life cycle in or on another organism, which we call the host. If in present time it establishes a symbiosis with the host, the relationship is called parasitism. In this relationship, the parasite always benefits and the host always suffers, but again, not to the point of death so that it can sustain the parasite. The parasite can be classified according to its site of infection into ectoparasite and endoparasite. An ectoparasite infests its host, while an endoparasite infects its host. And if the host presents with symptoms, it becomes diseased. Parasites can also be classified according to the host-parasite interactions, and hosts are classified based on which stage of the parasite's life cycle they harbor.